This video is gonna make a character you've never heard of more popular than ever. And if you couldn't tell by the length of this video, yes, this is another attention span challenge. So if your brain-rotted mind can't survive anything other than Hawk Tuah and Rizzler, swipe up, you lost the challenge. But I promise you will not regret if you choose to watch this whole thing through. This is Rook, and I can't even begin to express how incredible him and his story are. So let's just start from the beginning. Planet Exodus was a planet purchased by the company Better World in 2152. It was colonized in 2159, but by 2170 the world engine began to fail, which is something that I'll explain later. The year is now 2173, where Rook begins to explain that nobody knew why the world engine failed, but it did. As the system shut down, everyone who bought a ticket to this manufactured planet of broken promises bought another ticket to get off of it. And as the last ship of the paying population boarded the fleeting ships, Better World promised that they'd come back for Rook and their other employees, but they never did, and it's been 2 years since then. Nothing has come down from the sky to rescue them. The only things flying are ships flying out of there, attempting to leave the planet behind. But most of the people who make these ships aren't rocket scientists, so for every one that makes it through the clouds, another 50 explode in mid-air, crash landing back on Exodus. Now, because Rook is also looking to get off of Exodus, he's building a rocket as well, and constantly scavenging for parts. So the ships that fell to make it off planet give him hope, because there's still a lot of functional components at their crash sites, and upon his arrival to one nearby, he tries reaching out to his friend Swine through his helmet, telling him that he's gathering parts and needs his help. But according to Swine, he wasn't able to join him because he was way out of range and currently looking through a crash site of his own. Rook was definitely irritated upon hearing this, because without any help from Swine's pigs and boars, finding what he needed in this burning wreck before it was melted was gonna be impossible. Nevertheless, he continued sorting through the wreckage until discovering that the pilot of the ship was still alive. It wouldn't be for long though, considering the massive spike piercing through his abdomen, but still Rook felt obligated to ease his pain, so he pulled out a Medi-Bedi with painkillers to help his discomfort. But to his surprise, the pilot refused to take them, instead handing Rook a folder while saying don't let them burn. Now obviously Rook was confused, but respected the man's wishes and disengaged. After that, he began to express that his mind was connected to the birds. He pushed their thoughts and controlled their actions, which is something extremely important to this character and honestly the entire universe, because besides just looking extremely cool, Rook's helmet actually serves a purpose and allows him to control Rook's crows and ravens. You see, Better World hired him to be a warden, and wardens were tasked with the responsibility of controlling Better World's engineered wildlife. Their patented neural network system gave the wardens complete control of every animal on Exodus, so they can make them work for them. There's a warden who controls the pigs, who is Rook's best friend Swine. There's a warden who controls the bears, the wolves, and so on and so forth. But because the world engine is failing now, the engine that these helmets run on, they aren't always reliable, so sometimes the animals are able to refuse orders. But nevertheless, Rook tells his ravens to stay away from the dying pilot because he knew that they wanted to eat him. After that, Rook was taken by surprise when a massive bear came raging out of the smoke, attempting to end his life. So he dove out of the way and started blasting it with his hand cannon, but to no surprise, the bear was unrelenting, using its massive paw to send Rook flying directly onto the ground. At that point, he knew he was on the verge of defeat, so with his back against the wall, he pounced on the bear's neck, where he relentlessly jammed his knife into its neck repeatedly, but because it wasn't even phased in the slightest, he re-established his connection to the birds, who immediately came to his defense, swarming and picking the bear apart with everything they had until it eventually retreated. After their victory, Rook buried the pilot and began searching for something for the birds to eat because he knew they were starving. Later on, he drove to his base of operations, a city called New Mason that was once populated by almost 800,000 people, but now its only resident was Rook and only served as the location housing his rocket. Upon getting out of his vehicle, he took off his helmet while expressing that he needed a break from the birds, and while eating what food he had left, he quickly realized that he was running low on alcohol, so he took a trip into town to restock his supplies. And after making his way to the top of some apartments, we see that a bunch of rooms in the building are spray painted with red X's because those are the rooms he already foraged through. Once he got what he needed from apartment 333, he marked it the same as all the others and then decided to go watch a movie at the theater all by himself. During his time there, he opened up the folder handed to him by the pilot earlier, discovering a picture of the pilot and his family family, which explains why he told him not to let them burn, but also left Rook puzzled and curious as to where this family was. The days that followed were pretty much identical to the days prior, consisting of scavenging for food, drinking healthy amounts of alcohol, and working on his ship. But as time continued passing, he grew more and more on edge because time was running out and resources were growing more scarce. The story then goes to what used to be a lake. Rook swore there was water there just a few days ago, and as his hunger for food persisted, he expressed that his birds would be hungry as well soon, and that the only reason they hadn't eaten him yet was because of his helmet. Soon enough, he reunited with his friend Swine finally, but not without being trampled by his hogs, who immediately started eating all of his fish upon their arrival. Once Swine entered the scene, he apologized for his hogs' behavior and expressed that they hadn't eaten today, so their hunger was overriding his commands. To try and regain control of them, he rebooted his helmet, stating that there was something wrong with the neural network, but Rook assured him that it wasn't their helmets and was actually a result of the world engine failing. Hog wasn't so convinced though, believing something else was interfering. Nevertheless, Rook then stressed that they only had a few months and maybe even weeks before everything died. Refusing to leave his pack astray though, Swine conveyed his disinterest in leaving the planet, insisting on staying with his drift because they were more than just animals to him, but Rook thought he was crazy, exclaiming that the hogs would tear him apart once his helmet went offline. After that, Swine asked Rook if he'd spoken with any of the other wardens like Dire Wolf about the glitches with their helmet. He hadn't, and then emphasized how important it was for them to recover the parts they needed. Tonight, Hog didn't want to worry about that though, telling Rook to give it a rest so they could relax and enjoy some drinks together. Later on, when Rook was drunk, he went back to his base of operations to work on his rocket, which clearly wasn't a good idea because he accidentally caused something to explode that knocked him onto his back and caused him to go unconscious. During the time he was out, he was given a flashback of his childhood on his father's farm back on Earth. This is where we realized that he was given control of crows and ravens because he frequently dealt with them picking at their crops. But one day, after making a scarecrow in hopes of scaring them away, he noticed a bunch of massive ships flying up above in the sky, so he ran to the house to tell his father, but then the news station his father was watching caught his attention. Earth was spiraling into complete and utter chaos. The west coast was uninhabitable thanks to superfires, powerful earthquakes were striking the New Madrid fault, homelessness was at an all-time high of 33%, banks were collapsing, outbreaks of viruses were growing more and more frequent, and the world was just a really scary place to be, which is exactly why Better World purchased Planet Exodus and promised it would be a paradise. After asking his father what all of this meant, his father explained that everyone who could was leaving, but they weren't gonna run away because this was their home. 15 years later, the whole entire farm was set ablaze, including their crops, their barn, and their house, and after desperately trying to find his father by kicking down doors and helplessly calling out to him, Rook would end up losing everything that day. Once the fire was put to a stop, an unknown man assured Rook that his father did this on purpose as a dying gift for him because Better World would be able to use it as a port for Exodus, and Rook would jump to the top of the relocation line if he accepted their offer. And although he wasn't convinced this was his father's doing, Rook eventually accepted Better World's offer and became a warden. While boarding his transport, he was struck by guilt as he observed the homeless people who couldn't afford to leave Earth, but nonetheless he boarded the ship, spending the next 13 months of his life traveling to Exodus. After that, the story brings us back to present day, with Rook waking up from his accident earlier and then driving over to Swine's place in his vehicle. On his way there, he tried using his helmet to express that they were getting off this planet this very instant, but Swine gave him no response. Once he made it there, he was shocked to discover that a bunch of Swine's stuff was completely destroyed, and on top of that, a bunch of his hogs had been slaughtered. That's when the story switches things over to Swine himself, commanding his drift to run as fast as they could while in the middle of running away from something. And not just any something, but a whole entire pack of giant bears. In the midst of using his weapon to try and defend his drift, Swine was overwhelmed when a bear used an immense amount of force to crush his body into the ground. And while trying to reach for his weapon, a figure standing above him told him not to move because his spine was broken, and then ripped off his helmet while saying that his skull was crushed as well. And that figure was none other than the warden of the bears, Ursaw. But sadly, that's when this issue comes to an end. But if you want to see what happens next and you think Rook Exodus is just as amazing as I think it is, let me know in the comments down below.